Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Hello, good afternoon. It's great to see you all back. Welcome to our afternoon plenaries. I hope you all are enjoying the conference. How's it going? That's so good to hear. I have been walking around, talking to people, meeting, and the hallways are just buzzing with such good energy. It's really exciting to be back together after so long, isn't it? And the feedback I've been hearing from most people as I ask, what are their takeaways, what are they feeling? The theme of all the feedback is feeling re-energized and replenished, and I'm so thrilled to hear it. So we've had so many incredible speakers at this forum so far, and I'm very much looking forward to these next back-to-back plenaries. This first one is to talk about ideas into action. So ideas is NLIHC's racial equity and racial justice work, and it's a thread that goes through everything that we do, internally and externally. IDEAS stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, anti-racism, and systems thinking. So you all know very well the importance of this work and its connection to housing. There are tremendous and unacceptable racial disparities in housing, and these disparities did not happen by chance. And so at NLIHC, we believe that housing justice and racial justice are inextricably linked. And just as deliberate, racist public policies created and maintain racial disparities in housing today, it's only with deliberate anti-racist policies that we will reverse the harm done and achieve racial equity in our housing system and our country. So for the last 3 years, the National Income Housing Coalition has undertaken an organization-wide initiative to advance racial equity and inclusion in our policy analysis and advocacy, our research, our organizing, our internal operations, and our external relationships. And everyone at the National Income Housing Coalitions, myself, the board of directors, the entire staff are deeply committed to this work. So as part of this work, we have deepened and strengthened our partnership with tenant leaders and other impacted people. And tenant leadership has always been important to the National Income Housing Coalition. In 1974, Cushing Dolbear founded NLIHC, and she ensured that tenants and impacted people are at the highest level of leadership of our organization on our board of directors. So 25% of our board seats are for impacted people. And over the decades, Cushing and Sheila Crowley, my predecessor, and myself have worked closely with many tenant leaders in our work. The National Income Housing Coalition is engaged with tenants through the resident caucus of our board of directors, through our Tenant Talk magazine, which I hope all of you have seen and read and share with your partners, through the pre-forum sessions that we have here at the conference. And in 2019, at NLIHC's pre-forum sessions, tenant leaders, including some here in this room, like JR and Joy, Rachel and Danny, urged us to keep improving, to do more, to engage tenants and to amplify their leadership. And we really took that feedback to heart. And during the pandemic at the coalition, the entire staff worked to expand and deepen our tenant engagement and the ways that we could support your leadership in your communities. So they created Tenant Talk Live, regular webinars by and for impacted people. We created NLIHC's first ever tenant leader cohort, which you heard me talk about yesterday and you'll hear more from soon. And to make all of this happen, really to truly dedicate the whole of NLIHC to this work and to ensure that we have the capacity to do it, the most important commitment that I could make as CEO was in creating and filling a new senior leadership role here at the Coalition, the SVP for Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we were so pleased and fortunate to be able to promote our own Renee Willis into that role. So please join me in welcoming Renee to the stage now to share more about our ideas work and to introduce our next speakers. Renee.
There are a lot of people in this room. I love it, and I love the energy as well. Again, my name is Renee Willis. I'm with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and thank you so very much for that very, very warm welcome. So I open with a passage from Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. And I wish to use this to frame, why it's important for all of us to center racial equity in the work that we do in addressing these challenges. And in her book, she explores human hierarchy and describes America as an old house with a caste system that is as central to its operations as are the studs and joists that we cannot see in the physical buildings we call home. The inspector trained his infrared lens onto the misshapen bow in the ceiling, an invisible beam of light searching the layers of lath to test what the eye could not see. This house had been built generations ago, and I had noticed the slightest welt in a corner of the plaster in a spare bedroom and had chalked it up to the idiosyncrasy. Over time, the welt in the ceiling became a wave that widened and bulged despite the new roof. It had been building beyond perception for years. An old house is its own kind of devotional, a Dowwagger aunt with a story to be coaxed out of her, a mystery, a series of interlocking puzzles awaiting a solution. Why is this soffit tucked into the southeast corner of an eaves? What is behind this discolored patch of brick? With an old house, the work is never done, and you don't expect it to be. America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. Wind, flood, drought, and human upheavals batter the structure that is already fighting whatever flaws were left unattended in the original foundation. When you live in an old house, you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester, whether you choose to look or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction. Whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. We in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations, cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves, and yes, not one of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now. And any further deterioration is, in fact, on our hands. And that's from Caste, Isabel Wilkerson's book. And so when we talk about systemic racism, it's systemic racism past and present, has led to, significant racial disparities. And we have an obligation, all of us, to center racial equity in the work that we do. And so over the last years, the coalition has undertaken an organizational-wide initiative to advance racial equity in the work that we do internally, in our internal operations, as well as our relationships with our external partners. So in the last several years, we developed a new mission statement that really centers racial equity. We established an equity action team of staff to really kind of guide the overall direction of the work that we're doing at the coalition. We also established internally an affinity group at the coalition. And as Diane spoke about earlier, we use the acronym IDEAS as the frame in which to hold some of the work that we do, which again stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Anti-Racism, and Systems Thinking. We co-created a narrative video game to explore the past and present of racist housing policies called Dots Home, which you can also check out in one of the rooms behind us. And we have convened and will continue to convene discussions on racial equity. Last summer, many of you may already know that we hosted the Summer of Ideas, which was an educational series that showcased and amplified stories about social and economic issues facing marginalized communities. And then we're supporting the work of our partners, our state partners. Many of them are here in this room. And in 2022, which was just last year, we created and convened the first state and tribal partner racial equity cohort. And really, it's a subgroup of about 19 organizations that are from different regions of the country, and they're really actively working to integrate racial equity into their policies and things. And then we also engage tenant and community leaders in advancing racial equity. So in addition to, we wanted to make sure that we brought many voices to the table, diverse voices. So we're working with 15 members, tenant and community leaders, who are really helping us to shape our policy priorities, helping us to shape the agenda for this policy forum, and really making sure that we are making space for people with diverse voices. And as part of that, we held our first tenant and community leader retreat. And instead of me telling you about it, I want to show you a short video.
NLIHC held its first ever hybrid tenant and community leader retreat on October 7th to 9th in Albany, Georgia. The retreat gathered together members of NLIHC's tenant leader cohort, which is made up of people with lived experience of housing insecurity who have become leading voices and advocates in their communities in the fight for housing justice. The retreat aimed to introduce tenant leaders to each other and provide a forum for discussion about developments in their communities, topics for the tenant session of NLIHC's annual policy forum, and ideas about how to incorporate an intersectional outlook with an emphasis on racial equity into NLIHC's policy priorities and advocacy strategies. To ensure the group had sufficient tools to tackle these goals, NLIHC brought in several consultants to facilitate conversation and provide training on racial trauma and healing.
I am a native Albanian. Born here on the Guillenville Road. I was baptized in the creek up the street, up the road from it. You are at the beautiful Resort. 1,638 acres. Now, y'all, put them cameras down. Listen.
I'm listening.
Listen. Take it in. Feel it. Feel it.
I'm going to stop now.
1,638 acres of land. It was part of a plantation. One of the largest, it held the largest number of enslaved people in the state of Georgia.
All right, let's give it up to our tenant and community leader cohort. They were awesome. And the woman you saw on the tape singing, Miss Rutha Mae Harris, is here again with us today to share with us, one of the original freedom singers from the Civil Rights. So thank you, Miss Rutha Mae. All right, and so let's get into our next session. And as it looked like a lot of fun, and it was a lot of fun, but the tenant leaders really did get to work. And as soon as they came back, they really started to dig into, and they were invited to the White House to talk about tenant protections. And they also sent a letter to the White House regarding certain recommendations. So want to bring up our panelists. We're going to have a fireside chat with the Secretary of HUD. We're really excited about that. And I want to bring up Mindy Woods, Zella Knight, and Mrs. Brown. Mindy Woods is a member leader of the Resident Action Project. She's also a board member of the Coalition, and she's a resident of Seattle. Mrs. Brown is President Emeritus of the 334 East 92nd Street Tenant Association. She's a board member of the Coalition, and she is also a resident of New York City. And Zella Knight is a member leader of the Resident United Network of Los Angeles. She's a board member of the Coalition, and she's a resident of Los Angeles. Welcome, ladies. And we also have with us our moderator, the Secretary of HUD, Ms. Secretary Marcia Fudge, the 18th Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Let's welcome Secretary Fudge to the stage.
it's a lot of people in here. How's everybody doing? Good. Thank you all so much for having me today. I think I'm going to jump right into it. I want to thank you all for inviting me, and I especially want to thank Diane for the work and the leadership of this organization. I mean, we would never be even half as good as we are without your help, and we thank you. I'm certainly pleased to be with tenants today. I talk to an awful lot of people. I don't get a chance to talk to you enough, so thank you so much for being here. Let's get at it. Let me first off start by just seeing if I can find out a little bit more about who you are as people and as leaders. So if you would just tell me what brought you to this work, why do you advocate for other people, and what keeps you doing it? And we'll start with you, Ms. Knight.
Well, like you, Secretary Fudge, I come from a life of service. And so I'm taking on the charge from Fannie Lou Hamer.
All right.
And Fannie J. Knight, who I lost the first day of Black History Month a year ago. And they said, when I liberate myself, I can liberate others. And so I'm channeling the pain you know about, Secretary Fudge, the pain we know about in this effort. We're sick and tired of being penalized, ostracized, weaponized, stigmatized, criminalized, and thrown in the streets. All because... All because of profits and not people. We have a right for safe, decent, affordable, accessible housing. And so we're tired of the safety nets that we utilize, such as the Section 8 voucher, being used as a device to discriminate, prevent us from getting the best of the best, and putting us in that pain of the streets. We're tired of the investments that are being directed to these corporate profiteers who want to abuse, use, and misuse us. We're in this together. We were supposed to be one nation, one nation. And so in this effort today, and continuing under your leadership, we're going to restore, we're going to repair, and we're going to reclaim the debt that we said we were going to do with our ancestors.
Ms. Woods?
I can't.
Yes, you can.
I can't follow that.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
What you say, Mindy?
I can't follow that.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
Everything that Zella said. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran.
Thank you for your service,
Thank you.
darling. Thank you. Thank
I served in the Persian Gulf War, and I remember a day that our ship pulled into Sri Lanka. My mom had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 2 weeks before I left on my deployment. So every opportunity to call home and check to see if I still had my mom on this side of heaven, I took. We were driving up to the American Embassy so we could all make our phone calls, 7 of us. And we drove past a tree with a couple and the skinniest cow I had ever seen with a piece of corrugated tin stuffed up into the branches, and that's what they called home. And I distinctly remember thinking, thank God we don't have it like that in America. And I came home, and a year and a half later, I lost my mom, and I became a single parent. And when we were living in an apartment that was being taken over by black mold, that was a housing authority owned apartment. And when I called the manager and I said, there is mold in this apartment, he blamed me for not cleaning well enough or having too much stuff, and the list went on and on. And after my son got so sick that he had to be tutored from home, and the tutor would get sick 45 minutes after being in our apartment, I knew there was something wrong. I believe, like air, food, and water, housing is a basic necessity. We lost that apartment shortly after that, after they tried to evict me. And fortunately, after calling a list of organizations, including the EPA, the American Lung Association, and other national organizations, I found a local HUD attorney who told me that if, under the HUD rules, if that apartment was not safe or healthy, that I did not have to pay rent until they remediated that mold. They sent a man up to my apartment to cut a hole out in the bathroom behind the toilet and the drywall, and showed me the black fuzzy insulation behind that wall. And I said, "You're going to replace that, right?" And he said, "No, my orders are only to replace the drywall." I had no recourse. I had nobody on my side. I was low income, I was sick, and I couldn't fight back. And when we got kicked out of that apartment and then had to wait on a wait list just to get into the only shelter in my area that took women with children for 4 months while couch surfing, then we got put into a motel. And I felt, as a parent, my whole job was to protect and care for that child, and I felt like I'd failed. And I remember we walked out of that motel room one morning at 6:50 in the morning, and I heard a door close, 4 doors down, and we came face to face with one of my son's best friends and his dad. And we both just stopped, and I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "My wife got sick. We don't know why, but she's having massive seizures. She lost her job. We lost our house." That's the day I realized that homelessness does not discriminate, and it can happen to anybody at any time for any reason. And that's the day I got pissed off and I started to fight back.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Zella. As you know, I'm Lorraine Brown, affectionately called Mrs. B.
The Queen.
And I want to preface my answers and my questions to let you know that I suffer with an invisible disability. I have TBI, traumatic brain injury. So I have a lot of Herman Cain moments when everything is swirling around. And for that reason, I put my thoughts to paper. So I thank you for your patience and your understanding. What brought me to this work? Well, during the 1980s, I worked for IBM out of California, and our training center was in Atlanta. And so I had to go to Atlanta for training. And I was surprised and disappointed that the people who I fought for during the movement, the sit-ins, sitting at the counters, going to jail, being beat, did not progress as I hoped. The people who were going to get ahead got ahead and continue to get ahead. Remembering my roots, I was raised in the Lenox Street Housing Project in Boston. I was the 6th family to move in 1939. And so when returning to California, I made sure that I addressed the needs of our small community to make a difference, to create more affordable housing, for Black, brown, and marginalized people. In 2008, during the financial crisis, I lost my home because I was a 3-time cancer survivor, and our system does not allow you to have any assets. So either save my house or save my health. That was the choice at the time. I became homeless for a short period of time, and there was an ad posted in the newspaper for Section 8 vouchers. I applied, and I was fortunate enough to receive a voucher. It was suggested that I return to the East Coast to New York to be with my son, who was residing. Well, the landlords were not receptive in New York to Section 8 vouchers, and the offerings were not much to be desired. So I ported home to Boston, to Lincoln, Mass. And they had a recruitment campaign for Section 8 residents to become a member of the Resident Advisory Board. I applied. I was elected by my constituents. I applied to be chair of Section 8. I was elected by my constituents. When I arrived, there were 0 Section 8 members on the Resident Advisory Board. Within 6 months, we had 30 residents. And we did this through recruiting, education, and training. And it was important for me to have the tenants at the table. The decision-making, the policies, you can't do it without the tenants there. You can't publish an RFP unless a tenant has participated in that, okay? And you had to have someone who was disabled, a person of color, an elderly person. We were effective. Now, during this tenure at BHA, I learned about Section 3 and the opportunities it provides its residents. We worked with Committee for Boston Public Housing, Willie Mae Bennett, and she invited Keith Swiney in from Motivation, Inc. I know a lot of you folks in this room have been trained by Keith, okay? You're all right. And Mr. Swiney provided training, an all-day training. And the Housing Authority was so supportive. We had it at the university. We had contractors. We had PHAs, EDs from all of New England and the tenants, all in the same room, learning, growing, and promising to do better and be better. That's what brought me to this work. This Section 3, as you folks know, I am passionate about Section 3 because it changes lives. I've seen Section 3 millionaires through their resident-owned businesses, gives them an opportunity to move and grow and take care of their families. So I continue to be part of this. I want everybody to learn about Section 3 and the benefits of Section 3. Because right now, as the regulation is written, it doesn't benefit anybody. It only addresses ours. And that's the previous administration's mistake, but I know you're going to correct that. So that's what brought me to this work.
Count on it. Count on it.
Yes.
And please do. Whew. Let me just say a couple of things. I know you're going to ask me a question, but let me just say a few things as I've listened to your experiences. Number one, you said I am on your side. HUD is on your side. Because if people want to work there with me, they have to be on your side.
All right, thank you.
Secondly, I'm not going to pretend or be dishonest with you and say that we can fix every problem, because we can't. But I will fix every one I can.
All right.
I promise you that. And hopefully make people understand that every incremental change we make is important, but that we can't stop. We have to keep making change until we get it right.
Yes.
I know this country doesn't do everything right. I know we failed in a lot of places. I know how difficult it is to try to navigate the federal government. I have trouble myself, and I have worked for the federal government a long time. It is not designed to help people in need.
Right.
But we are getting there, little by little. So I do want you to hold me accountable. This is what I do for a living. This is what I love to do. It is my life's work. This is the last job I will ever have. But I want it to be the best job I've ever done.
All right, all right.
I don't know if I can follow Ms. Knight either, but go on and ask me a question if you want to.
No. I think you got it there. So I'm going to jump into my subject matter.
Okay.
And as we sent a letter to you presenting our concerns, and in many instances, providing solutions. So as the letter defines in regards to racial equity, and I know I'm going to set this as candid as you are, because we kismet.
We really are.
This nation continues to fail when it comes to those of us who are disabled, given if we are born with it or given as we inherited with age. And we cannot stop that aging process. It's with us for life. Within our current structures, and particularly I want to thank you for your leadership when President Biden said through the executive order that these agencies do these action plans and report on those. You stepped the game up and got very specific, concise, and direct.
That's right.
Now, if we can have that example of the other agencies, we'd be on a better path. However, we're finding, particularly with our affirmative further fair housing element, that is not getting down and dirty in regards to the repair and the restoration we need. It doesn't have specific criteria and metrics that defines outcomes. What do I mean by that? Many of us want to live in the best of the best. However, many of us want to preserve that community and relationship we have in the area that we have. And so we're asking for a deep dive to ensure we don't have that reverse gentrification that many times impacts us in the worst way.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
I know that in the last quarter of last year, 30% of all the properties sold in this country were sold to private corporate investors. 30%. So then you wonder why there's gentrification.
Yes.
It's because we have people who can sit and buy a property, make a decision in 6 minutes, give you cash,
Yes.
and there are no rules or regulations in communities and cities to stop them from doing it.
Absolutely.
So the first thing I think we need to do is we need to decide how communities, and we'll help from the federal government, how we can stop people from just going in and buying up whole blocks.
Yes.
There's a house next door to me. I happen to live in a community that I have lived in for a very, very long time. It is a all-black community. It is a community that is undervalued. but it is a community that I love. And so I live there.
Yes.
I could buy the house next door to me if it's vacant, but I can't get loans from a bank. So the first thing we did is say to FHA, we're going to make these small dollar loans so that people can buy homes in their communities where they choose to live. And we're going to give them the money to fix those homes up. So you watch for that. That is going to be happening. The other thing is, of course, by profession, I'm a recovering lawyer. And so I believe in fair housing laws.
Yes, yes.
And if I believe that people are, as a matter of fact, Demetria McCain is here, who runs our Office of Fair Housing. Oh, there she is right there. Stand up, Demetria. So, and let me tell you what, she's one of the best lawyers I know, so do not get crosswise with Demetria. Because we believe in enforcing the fair housing laws of this country. And we know that part of the reason that so many people, especially people of color who are living on the streets today, most of it is not their fault. But it is a fault of the system.
Yes.
And so we are looking at the structural and institutional racism that resides within the system so that we can make sure that we can reverse those things. We've got out, new regulations. We're looking at environmental justice. I mean, people don't realize that even in bad storms, the people who are hurt the most are poor people and people of color. And so we know that. And so we are working to make sure that we can address those issues. But most importantly, what we are saying to the president, and thank goodness he listened, is that we need more resources in these areas. And so if you look at the president's 2024 budget, you will be extremely pleased. He has awarded to HUD $73 billion, which is $1 billion more than we had in this fiscal year. And he has specifically put resources into building at least 2,000 new housing units for disabled and senior citizens. Put more that is something worth clapping for. Put more resources, almost $9 billion into public housing, just for repairs and upkeep, $9 billion. Now, mind you, we have to get this passed through Congress, but the president has requested it. That's a huge, huge ask. Nobody thought about this but this president and this administration. And so when we asked and they finally agreed, I was excited about the opportunities because the one thing I'm always going to be is black.
Yes.
And the other thing I'm always going to be is a woman. So, I mean, I understand where you come from. So it's no different for me. So it's a sad person that won't fight for themselves. So if I'm going to fight for myself, I'm going to fight for you.
Yes.
That's right.
And the rest of it is just a matter of using the resources we have in a way that is fair and equitable. You talk about justice in your letter.
Yes.
That's what justice is.
Yes.
It may not be to elevate everybody up here, but it's to treat everybody fair, give everybody a fair shot, give people an opportunity to succeed, and not stop them from doing it because we've set up barriers.
Yes.
So we're here to tear down the barriers.
Yes.
And I think that we are, and I think that we will. And if we're not, then continue to tell us. I'm real thick-skinned. So you can tell me when I'm not doing something right. Now, I may not always agree with you, but I will give it my best shot. I promise you that I will. Oh, I'm supposed to ask a question, right? Okay. In your letter, you mentioned the words power shift. You said that there should be a power shift when it comes to tenant-landlord relationships. So can you share more with me what you were thinking about, what you would think that rebalance of power would look like?
Yes, so Secretary Fudge, I believe that those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, but often lack the influence, the power, and the resources. So my fellow colleagues here and many in this room feel that those with the lived expertise in housing instability and homelessness and housing injustice should be on the boards, at those tables, making policy with HUD, with the other organizations within the government, or at least have, conversations and continual check-ins with each other to better understand what is happening right now. As I mentioned, I'm a Gulf War veteran, and when I lost our apartment, I felt powerless. And it wasn't until I got into the shelter that another organization came and asked or told us about a bill that was in our legislature. I'm from Washington State, so there was a bill in Olympia that was due to sunset, and it would eliminate 70% of the funding for the shelters in our state. And so they asked for any volunteers to go down and share their story. So, like I said, I was a mad mama at that point. So I was like, sign me up. So I went and told my story, and that's the day that I realized our stories have power. And every one of us has a story. Every single one of us has a story. And those in the elected offices oftentimes are far removed from some of our stories. And it's not until we are able to humanize what we are going through do they actually hear us. I know that the reports and the stats and the graphs and the charts are very important, but it is more important, I think, to actually humanize and sit before somebody and look them in the eye and hear the pain and hear the anguish and the trauma. Yes. And I cannot underscore trauma enough. Telling our stories over and over again is a trigger. And I'm sure many can agree. So, I would love to see, and I know they're going to speak on this too, but I want to see that the VA and HUD are working more together. We got into an apartment and got stabilized, and 3 years later, we had a landlord that was systematically evicting or not renewing the leases of the 13 of us moms with kids who came out of the same program. And I was the 13th family to not get a new lease. I also noticed that all 13 families had either the whole family was of color or had children of color. Mm-hmm. So I have a beautiful son that I will die for and fight for. And when I saw the discrimination that was happening, I couldn't save my neighbors, but I knew I had to fight back and try to prevent this from happening to another family. And I now am in the position of working in my city that I live in as the Human Services Program Manager, and a lot of my calls are from veterans. And these veterans, we fought for this country.
That's right.
Many of our veterans are coming home, whether they saw active, duty or they were, sitting on a base somewhere, but regardless, it is still a service to this country. And I think it's an absolute shame that we cannot provide housing for our veterans, and that our VA system, you've heard, it has a lot of issues. I won't go to the VA for my medical needs. But I would love to see HUD and the VA working more closely together, to have a more streamlined system to make sure that we're giving priority to our veterans. A lot of our veterans are coming home with PTSD, if not physical disabilities, but we have an aging population of veterans that saw true horrors, and they're out on the streets, and it is killing me when I have to say to them, I'm so sorry, I have nothing to offer you.
Let me say a couple of things. We do, the VA, Dennis McDonough and I do work very closely together, and I think you'll be pleased to know that veteran homelessness is down 11% over the last couple of years. So we are working diligently. But I would say this too, because I grew up in communities like the communities that many of you live in, PTSD is a problem in this country, especially for young black children, for young Hispanic children, for poor children. So we need to start to address the problems writ large. Yes, it is a huge problem with the military as you look at the numbers of suicides. But when you look at kids who are afraid to even walk to school, we have a whole lot of work to do. To hear gunshots is just normal.
Absolutely.
With them. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard. So I'm trying to get with HHS so that they can start to put in place programs that we can put into communities, that we can put in prisons, that we can put in shelters.
Yes.
So that when people come out of these institutions or these neighborhoods, they are prepared
Yes.
to live in a society that is going to challenge them.
Yes.
So it's a big problem, but we are working on it.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Well, I just want to piggyback on what Mindy had said when we talk about rebalancing of power between landlords and tenants. My mantra has always been monitoring, oversight, and enforcement. And tenant protections are effective when there is strong and consistent monitoring, oversight, and enforcement. I would like to see the Biden-Harris administration implement very strong anti-gouging measures to prevent landlords from imposing exorbitant rent increases. Create just cause eviction standards. Expunge eviction records, which would cut down on the homelessness. Include in the rent application that landlords, especially corporate landlords, would have to pay legal fees on all evictions, because then they will take their time and make sure that they do due diligence before they take a tenant to court, knowing that they have to pay for the evictions, because they're going to write it off anyway. Okay? So we need to make sure that they understand that you're going to have to pay for it. And so Congress and, of course, the administration should work together to enact the TEA, the Tenant Empowerment Act, which would hold federal agencies and landlords accountable. There should be some type of advocacy office established under the DOJ, so where we can take them to task and charge them. Okay.
Well, one of the things I think that all of you know is that we did an awful lot of work with eviction prevention over the last couple of years, primarily, of course, tied to the pandemic. But in this new budget, there is additional request for eviction prevention. So that's rental assistance, that's legal assistance, that's talking to judges in courts. So we are working on that because we know it is a major problem, because as I'm hearing now, evictions are higher now than they were pre-pandemic. Yes. So we need to figure out how we address that problem. I think some of it we are getting a real handle on. But I think it's just important for you all to understand, if you do, but I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way. The only people in the federal government that ever talk about poor people is us.
That's right. Yes. That's right.
You know, poverty is just not something people talk about, and it's something people don't choose to address.
That's right.
So that's what I like about being here with you, because as advocates, you can talk to HHS and say, look, poverty is a major issue in this country and somebody needs to talk about it.
Yes.
Nobody talks about it but us. And so that's one of the things I'm going to ask you to do. I know my team is telling me that, because I'm supposed to give another speech this afternoon. So I know my team is telling me, but can I just say this one thing to you before I have to leave you? First off, I've so much enjoyed talking with you. You all embarrass me because y'all are so good at what you do. Well, let just tell you a little bit of something about where I really do come from. My grandmother was a domestic until the day she died. My grandmother helped everybody. Listen, I'm just going to say to you, I hope she's not in my contacts.
We talk about spirit moving.
Ooh, I'd be up out of here. But you know, the one thing about us growing up, I mean, I never even knew I was poor until I became almost an adult.
Yes.
Because we lived in this big house, right? A two-family. On one side was my great-grandparents, my aunt and uncle, their 6 kids, and whoever came from the South.
Yes.
On our side was my grandparents, my mother, my brother, and I, my aunt and her kids, and whoever came from the South.
That's right.
So, because when people would come move, they would stay with us because my grandmother was the person that everybody went to. My grandmother was the mother of the church. She was the leader of the neighborhood. But I had no idea that we didn't have anything because I had everything.
Yes.
And that's what home gives you.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
My mother was a labor organizer, the first woman to be a union steward, to work in an international organization. And so I grew up around people who worked for people.
Yes.
So it just became a part of who I am. And every day I wish my grandmother could be with me.
Yes, yes, amen.
Every day. And so I do this work because this is the work I know to do. I am really, truly with you as best I can be. I have an awesome team of people who work with me. And if ever you don't get the kind of response, I didn't say necessarily we can do it, but if people don't respond to you, I want to know it.
Secretary.
We work for you. You don't work for us.
Exactly. Would you please be kind enough and allow me one question?
Yes, ma'am.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Let me
Yes.
finish my question, please. Do you want it to be Section 3, tenant protections, or the disabled?
All of the above.
Let me
Say this about Section 3,
Let me-
you beat me up some more.
let me finish my question, please. Let me. The reason. The reason why I'm asking this, I'm an octogenarian. I'm post-chemo. I don't know when I'm going to start drooling. I've seen signs lately. And Section 3 means so much to me. It's changed lives. And with the stroke of a pen, you can cancel that ruling right now that doesn't benefit residents and start all over. But more importantly, Keith Swiney of Motivation Inc. just sold his company. And he has retired. And his whole heart has been at Section 3. And he's written something called 2 Years After Section 3. I want to give this to you and ask that you look at this. And that way you can understand what most people don't know or understand about Section 3 to make it better. I promise you, it will change lives. But also be assured that the National Low Income Housing Coalition, NAT, our tribal partners, our state partners are here to help you with the heavy lifting. Just call or whistle, and we'll be there. And thank you so much for giving so much money to HUD, more than any other secretary. You're doing great. You know, I see your releases all the time, and I see the great work that you're doing. But Section 3 will really. Save Section 9.
Let me just say this as in closing. Let me try to say this in closing. First off, let me say, I know we've not done a good job with Section 3 and we need to do better.
Yes.
And I'm not going to forget that. I know that we need to do that with Section 9 as well and 8. But we are going to get.
Resident Management Corporation is the only way to go. We need to own it already. It is ours. Resident Management.
Well, we're going to.
Talk to you soon.
Okay. All right. But I guess I will. I'm not coming to New York anytime soon. Y'all gonna quit messing with me. I'm not coming. But let me just. All right. Okay. All right. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. All right. Okay, so you convinced me. Y'all convinced me. Y'all convinced me. I promise you I'll be there. But you got it. Ho. Let me just say this. Okay.
Settle, let's all settle
I don't say
down.
things I don't mean.
Yeah, let's
If
all
I say I'm
settle down,
coming, I'm coming.
please.
That's right.
But let me just answer her question. Let me answer her question. Let me just answer her question what I want my legacy to be.
Thank you.
I just want my legacy to be that people know that I cared and I gave my best. That's what I want it to be.
Thank you.
All right, so hello. So we're going to continue this conversation. We're continuing the conversation. Let's give a round of applause to the secretary. Thank you, secretary. Thank you, secretary. Thank you, Secretary Fudge. Thank you, Secretary Fudge. Wonderful. And so we're going to continue this conversation. Thank you, everyone. We're going to continue the conversation. We have these wonderful tenants still on stage. And so we want to have time for questions. If I can just ask the room just to bring it down just a bit. If we can just bring it down just a bit so you can hear the wonderful tenants we have on stage. And again, thank you, Secretary. Thank you for being with us this evening, this afternoon. All right, so we want to continue the conversation and also have some reflection as well. So I'm going to move over here to be with the panel. Can you guys hear me? No. Yes, now you
Yes,
can.
now they
Okay,
can.
wonderful. So I want to just offer, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, but I'm going to ask really quickly the first question of the panel. I just would like just some reflections on the conversation that you've just had with the secretary. And any one of you can start. You go ahead.
Well, I felt that her responses were heartfelt, but I'm looking for action. And then once some of the things that we asked of her administration, when they're implemented, then I can tell you how I feel. But right now, it's a wait and see moment for me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Brown.
You're welcome.
Mindy?
I will say cautiously optimistic. I do feel hopeful. I think I echo Mrs. Brown's feeling that I think she truly does care.
That's right.
And like she said, this is her last job, so she's going to want to give it her all. Mm-hmm. What she's able to accomplish with Congress and everything else is going to be, remains to be seen. But I think that she truly does care.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mindy. And how about you, Zelenite?
I'm going to take the secretary at a word, and that is, we have a responsibility to hold her accountable. And so as we organize with our coalition build, we need to do it succinctly, unified,
Yes,
one accord,
yes,
and one objective.
yes.
We're in the mode of aging quickly. We saw what the pandemic did. We lost lives. We lost time. We lost opportunity to move and grow. That's not promised every day. So we came together today in the effort to remind ourselves we're about saving lives. And in the effort to do that, we can't do that from emotion. We can take the pain, but we have to do it from a holistic approach. We don't have any more time to be distracted, detracted, deterred. Decades we've been prevented from having the best and being the best. That time has to end today. So either we move in unification or we fall down together on this ground.
That's right.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Ms.
Stella.
All right, so I'm going to take questions from the audience. And the woman in the center aisle, I see you're with Chantel. If you want to have the first question.
That was disrupting for me because we did say we came here with solutions to the problems. My name is Maria Forbes, and I represent an awful lot of people. I'm going to tell you, I'm a tenant association president that has 750 units. I'm going to tell you, I'm with the Bronx South District Council of Presidents. I'm the business agent to that, and we have over 60,000 people we represent at that level. I'm a member of the National Congress of Neighborhood Women, and I also sit on the United Nations board to Habitat, which I was just elected for. I am the only public housing tenant association president that represents the world. So when I go, I'm sorry she left. I wanted to let her know that the New York delegation was in Poland in 2022, and that they came there to say Trump didn't support the 17 sustainable developmental goals. He didn't support climate change, but they came there to say that Biden had a program called Moving Urban Cities Forward. That was June 2022. I do not see that program published anywhere to say we are moving public housing forward, we are moving urban cities forward in any shape, form, or fashion. That does disturb me. My suggestion and recommendation, yesterday we had a small program and we was writing the future, what it was now, and other things. And I wrote the 10 Commandments. I wrote the 10 Commandments to what I thought the future should be. And what I feel the future should be is that we don't need to update, we don't need the bill passed, we need to be in the bill making this decision of the bill before Congress, Senate, or anybody else decides to do anything about it. So we don't have our seat at the table. I like the lady's answer at the end when she stated, we need to see. I believe in giving a new administration some area, but I also believe in seeing movement. So until we do have our seat at the table to make the bill, to pass that public housing, get the funding that it needs, then I don't know what to say because she got up and walked out. I don't do 15-minute appearances. I don't do press conferences. So I just think that that was a little bit abrupt, but I could see why she did leave because the crowd attacked her. And
Well,
that was bad. I feel, no.
So I do want to say,
it was bad to me.
listen, thank you so much for your comments. So let's move on to Dr. Bambi here in the front, and then we're going to move to, I'm sorry. The woman here with the mic. Sorry about that. If you can just identify yourself as well.
Diane's right there. Diane, make sure we get a picture.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay, I'm Lauren Embry. I am the director of the Indiana Tenant Association, and when I am not doing that, I am in the community working as a case manager. I do want to quickly say thank you, all of you ladies, for all of your years of commitment to this fight. I have to speak up as a case manager. I have been in a lot of rooms, and there have been everyday people who are currently enduring those lived experiences that we're talking about, and they have been asking for, like, so what can help me? What can I leave here with that is tangible? We have done a lot of brainstorming, we have done a lot of talking, but I want to make sure that for those that are in the room, they leave with something. So with that being said, you guys are, if you will say, the experts, if you will, what do you have to offer to those that are in the crowd and they need to leave with something tangible?
That's right. Thank you.
That's a very good question. And to keep it candid and honest, I can't answer that because it's not for me to answer that. We each have individual struggles and journeys, and there hasn't been a truest of true vehicle to connect that. As we're aware, with the pandemic, for 4 years, we were scattered only to see each other on a video or on Zoom. And yet we've had those pains and traumas prior to that. But the one thing that I would say to you is that if there is a challenge of them expressing their voices or their concerns, you be that catalyst. You take their pain, their trauma, and bring it with you. And through the policy effort, through the coalition building, through the organizations, we'll move that needle. As Secretary Fudge explained, it's slow increments. We've made progress, but we've got to build better. Mindy?
I'm going to take a different approach. All of that, yes. And one thing in our state, in Washington, we copied California, zealous state. We brought together tenants with lived experience or people with lived experience who have experienced housing injustice, instability, and homelessness. And we organized together. We created a statewide resident-led organization called Resident Action Project, and we used our stories from across the state to affect policy change on the local level, county level, and on up to the state level. It is the reason that we were the first state in the nation to have source of income discrimination banned. We just last year got right to counsel. We are making big strides, and we recognize that we are stronger together than we are as individuals. Yes, we have individual stories, and we each have our individual voice, but when we can work together, like Zella said, in unity with a singular message, and be active and advocate for ourselves and for each other, then we can actually move mountains, and that's what we've been able to do. So I'm happy to talk with you.
Thank you. So I'm going to follow the mic this time. So okay, for my team. And, okay, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Yes. My name is Beverly McFarland, and I'm a resident council president for Taft Houses in New York City. Mm-hmm. And I believe that you guys dropped the ball, unfortunately, on New York City. We are a different class in terms of what's happening in Section 8. We are opposed to Section 8 under the Section 18 bill. And RAD and PAC, we are opposed to RAD and PAC. It is negatively impacting our communities, and we are totally against it. You cannot talk about Section 3 without talking about Section 9. You cannot. Because under Section 9, is the only true affordable housing in New York City. And they're trying to take that away from us. So Ms. Fudge should have known how negative impact that our communities are getting, and we are having homelessness for this in these RAD impact conversions. So please, if you could do us a favor next time, incorporate in us public housing residents, which are the true low-income housing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your comment. And I will say that we are working with our tenant cohort members, and many of them are Section 9 public housing residents as well. So I thank you certainly for your comments as well. And even in the letter that the tenant cohort members sent to the Biden administration, to Secretary Fudge, Section 9, public housing was addressed. So it was front and center for sure. You have a copy. It's in your tenant packet that we gave out yesterday, and it is available online. So you do have a copy. But I'm going to close this out, and I thank you all. I thank the panel first. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. All right. And I want to bring Diane Yentel up to the stage. I'll do that.
And you're taking the lens and leaving. Okay. I'm taking it and running. I was running.
Thank you all. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your advocacy. You don't want to miss what's next, because standing right outside this ballroom door is one of the greatest legislative champions for public housing, for impacted people, for people who are experiencing homelessness, and we want to welcome her together. So I am really honored and pleased to introduce Congresswoman Maxine Waters. I have to say, Maxine Waters is one of the people, I tell people this story, that Maxine Waters is the only speaker I know who gets a standing ovation on her way into the room. And it happens every time. She is so loved, and with such good reason, because she has represented the 43rd District of California for over 30 years. She made history as the first woman and the first African-American chair of the House Financial Services Committee. She currently serves as ranking member of the committee, where she has demonstrated tremendous leadership in Congress to address the housing and homelessness crisis. Because of Maxine Waters, we got tens of billions of dollars to keep people housed during the pandemic. And because of Maxine Waters, we got Build Back Better passed through the House with $150 billion in investments in public housing, in the National Housing Trust Fund, in Section 8. So I am thrilled to sit down now with Chairwoman Waters for a conversation. So, I still call you Chairwoman, is that okay?
Yes.
Ranking Member Waters, you have been such an incredible lifelong champion of affordable housing. So tell us all why. Why housing? Why have you done so much to prioritize the issue of affordable housing and homelessness?
My goodness. Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you, Diane, for inviting me here today. And I want you to literally give a round of applause to Diane Yentel for her leadership, for what she's been able to do. She works very hard on behalf of low-income housing. She's in constant contact with me and my staff, and she rises to the occasion, does not mind putting out that press release, doing what is necessary to draw attention to the issues that we're working on. Give her a big round of applause. Thank you. I am so pleased to be identified in the way that you just did, asking me about my interest and my concern about housing. First of all, I think it is important for you to know that I became an expert on housing needs when I was a child. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, ended up being one of 13 children in my family. We lived in housing that had so many needs. First of all, you're all too young to know that in the wintertime, when ice is forming, that it would form on the pipes inside the house so that the water would freeze up. And we literally had to build a fire in the sink in order to get the ice to thaw so that we could have running water. I want you to know that the doors and the windows never fit the housing. And so what my parents did, what my mother did, was they would do something, I'm going to give you a new word, called chunking. Chunking means that you took rags and you stuck them and pushed them in between the cracks in the house. I could go on and describe to you what I learned about poor housing and a lack of decent housing. And I want you to know, I left home in California that's colder than it should be right now. But I have to admit, I had the temperature on my furnace up to 80 because I stay cold all the time. And I started being cold from the time I was born until now, and I refuse to live in a house without good heat and without good windows and doors and all of that. And so I have a lot of experience. But more than that, it's not just about what I experience. It's what about people are experiencing today all over this country. The cost of housing is off the scale to begin with. People cannot rent decent housing because they can't afford it. Low-income workers are challenged trying to pay just basic rents that they should be able to afford for decent housing. I want you to know that even those who save money to try for home ownership are having a very difficult time as we look at what is happening now with inflation and the interest rates are rising, and even people who have been saving money cannot afford. And what is this doing to the overall community of working people and people who don't have a lot of resources? Basically, there's this wealth gap. And that wealth gap is growing rather than with, drawing. And that wealth gap is about the lack of individuals to have ownership that builds equity that they could use for whatever, to send the kids to college, for a little business, for all kinds of things that would make the families more safe and secure. So I believe that the highest priority for spending in order to help people who are challenged, who have low income, who don't have a lot of resources, our challenge is to turn this country around and make sure that every human being, every family has decent housing and secure housing and have a place where they can not only go to bed at night feeling good about themselves and their family, but wake up the next day with hope and opportunity as a top priority for them to deal with in order to have a decent life and have some expectation that they can, because their government is going to help them. And I have some ideas, some additional ideas about it, but I want you to know, and Diane knows very well, the first thing is we've got to confront is we can't do this on the cheap. We need money. We need money. We need money to do it. And so I understand that the opposite side of the aisle, the Republicans, are talking about cutting HUD 40%. Well, we can't let them do that. We've got to hit the streets. We've got to say no to that. We've got to make sure that, and this is what I'm going to be focused on a bit, Diane, we haven't talked about it. I'm going to make sure that many of those representatives who have shacks and people living in tents in rural communities, we're going to make sure that that is exposed and that people know that they don't have the representation. I've challenged them already. And Scalise has said he wanted to work with me. We'll see. We'll see. But the thing that he keeps bringing up to me is he doesn't like housing first. And I'm saying to him, you can't let what you think about housing first get in the way of helping to provide decent and secure housing for the people you represent.
Absolutely.
For the people you represent.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, it's a kind of an old-fashioned notion, I think, of his, that somehow if you are homeless, the church is going to get you. You're on drugs, and they're going to change your life. They're going to clean you up, and they're going to test you. And if you pass the test, then you're eligible for housing. Hell no. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about human beings who have a right in the richest country in the world to have a decent place for them, their families to live. So, as you know, the fight is always on. And guess what? I got some boxing gloves.
Yes, she does. We've all seen her in action. And, you know, speaking of the money that we need, not only, obviously, do we need to stop cuts to the programs that exist, we need tens of billions of dollars more to rebuild public housing and make vouchers universal, as your legislation would do. And Build Back Better would have been a tremendous down payment. And, you know, everybody here should know that $150 billion that passed in the House, thanks to your leadership, there were many times where that money almost got pulled out altogether. And Representative Maxine Waters was at the forefront every time of making sure that that money stayed in and stayed targeted for the lowest income people. But it wasn't passed in the end.
It wasn't passed, but you're
what's next?
absolutely right. That was an important piece of legislation, and it was an important amount of money in that legislation. And we worked with the members, Democratic members, everybody was so supportive and so optimistic, because in Build Back Better, not only did we talk about the development of affordable housing, but we talked about all of our public housing that need infusion of money in order to upgrade them. And as I worked on Build Back Better, I have to tell you, I could not help but think about Nydia Velasquez, who called me and told me she was in a public housing development in New York in the dead winter with no heat. And I kept thinking about that, but I also thought about the elevators that don't work. I thought about the children who are in danger because the windows are broken, and on and on and on. And so in thinking about those things, not only was I convinced that we had to fight as hard as we could, and I want to tell you, this may not be the most political thing in the world, but I'll never forgive Manchin, even though he stepped up to the plate and helped us a little bit. So Sinema and Manchin have got to do better. And I want us to talk about what we can do to develop what I think may be a urban-rural renaissance in housing. And what I want to do is I want us to not only have the videos and the photographs of tents and shacks where people are living in rural communities that are not represented by their leaders, and of course couple that with the fact that people are living on the streets in tents and so-called skid row still, Even though we talk about having hotel room keys and we talk about all these things, I want to tell you, homelessness appears to me to be growing rather than receding.
Yeah.
And so we need the money. We need the representatives who are willing to stand up and fight. And I want us to work closely with Schumer because he is our leader. And so we want him to negotiate tough and hard in order to get what we need. We cannot have any negotiations in the back room where people give up because they think they can't win. No, and I'm saying to New York legislators, and that includes Mr. Torres and everybody else, stick with us when we get down to the real fight and the real challenge, no matter whom it is. And if it happens to be the leadership, that's what we got to do. All right? Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, we could talk with Representative Maxine Waters. We could talk all day about this. And I have my own questions here, but I know there's a lot of questions out here in the audience.
Okay. All right.
So we have a few minutes. I'm going to come first to Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown, who was waiting so patiently last time, and get a question answered.
Yes. First, thank you so much. I still call you Chairwoman as well, Waters. My name is Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown, and I am from Georgia. And I'm a person with lived experience of housing insecurity. My son here, David, was born into homelessness. He is now 9, former 2-time public housing resident. One of the things that I want to say, even public housing was my stabilizing factor. And as I got into advocacy, I found out that I got to do more than being an advocate. I got to get in those back rooms, so I became a lobbyist. And we have to train our younger people. I have a cane. A lot of others have canes, walkers. But I brought my 9-year-old son here on purpose so he can see what we do and why we do this work. What advice would you give young people who may not see or may not really understand where I took my son out walking in Washington, D.C., and where he could see people living in tents? Because he was an infant, he was a newborn when we were homeless, so he doesn't remember. But now he's old enough to know and remember. So what advice would you give young people to get them engaged in this work?
Okay, thank you very much. Diane, what I've been thinking about, you guys work so hard lobbying and talking with elected officials, convincing people, you know, that we need to spend the money, what have you. I think that we need to take a look at even broadening our advocacy by working closer with organized labor, by working closely with other nonprofits that may not be into housing, but when you take a look at it, it's all really connected. And many of them who are trying to feed people and all of that, they need to know that you need to put them in a house first so that they will have a stable place and a secure place to live. So I'm thinking about what can we do working with and outreaching to and getting the attention of organized labor, other nonprofits, and the churches are very interesting because many of them have programs where they will go to a skid row or an area and they'll take some clothing or they'll take some food. But what we've got to do is we've got to thank them, but we've also got to say, but that won't change their lives until we get the money by which to put them into homes and they're able to seek out jobs because they have a place to dress and take a bath and get ready and study and all of that. So we've got to say to them, thank you so very much, but we want you to join us as we confront this legislator who represents this area about what they should be voting for and what they should support. So let's get our young people involved, the millennials, everybody involved, and let's go to them and connect what they're doing with what we're doing so that we can have an expanded front, a united front to help us, because you're doing everything you can do in lobbying. Many of you are doing everything that you could do in your local communities kind of by yourselves, but let's expand the possibility of having others join with us so that we, and students also, all right? Thank you.
Thank you. So you all are going to get really mad, but get mad at me, not at Maxine Waters. But we have time for one more question. So I'm going to come over here. Wait for the mic, please.
Well, all the housing, my people, stand up for a minute, please. Maxine, we adore you. Let me tell you something. I've been in this fight for 42 years. Started with Sharpton, and I'm still going. And let me tell you, I watch you like a hawk, girl. You are a fighter, and I love you. But we in public housing are suffering. $9 billion from HUD, okay. Will we see it? I don't think so. Maxine,
yes.
In order for us to get things done, we have to take the corruption out of NYCHA. We need to get away from New York City Housing Authority and start our RMCs, Resident Management Corporation. It's the only way to go. We want your support. We need your support. I'm getting old, baby. I'm getting old. This fight is crazy. But look at what you have here. Public housing, please stand up. For real, stand up. It's too much. People are still, listen, when you get up cold with a baby in your house, that's not fun. When the ceiling falls on you, that's not fun.
She knows
and
it.
when you know for a fact, listen, I go out and get money for everybody. I don't care. I fight for that money. Been fighting for 42 years. But I'm tired of getting people money that are corrupt and that are not doing their job. That's where we have to start. New York City Housing Authority has to be removed.
All right. Thank you for that question. Thank you for the comments.
But what is it?
Public housing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let me just, respond to that for a minute and say that we need to perhaps convene our New York legislators. Let's get together with them.
All right.
There may be some disagreements. There may be a lack of understanding. But what I want to do is I want to have them really hear the desperation and what is being understood about what.
Let's let her
is not
answer,
being
please.
done.
Let's give her the respect she's earned and let her answer.
And here's what the point that I'd like to get to. I'd like to get to the point where there is an agreement with all of you and the advocates, et cetera, and the New York legislators to say we won't back down. We won't back down.
There we go.
We're going to stay in here, and we're not going to allow the negotiations to undermine all of the work that we're doing. Now, what I'm asking is something very tough, because as you know, there are compromises that are made for all reasons, some good, not so good. And you also know that oftentimes the leadership will say, well, listen, we got a little bit, and we want to say, no, we need more. And so I want to get together so that perhaps a commitment could be made to say we're not going to back down. We're going to move forward together. We'll try it.
We'll help make it happen.
Okay.
Thank you. Please join me in giving huge thanks to Chairwoman Waters for her leadership.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Now stay where you are, because we have another incredible housing champion at the door. Folks, we need to clear out this space because we have another member of Congress coming soon. Jerry and folks, we need to clear out this space. Folks. Next time we'll use different doors for entering and exiting. Lesson learned. All right, let's let Maxine Waters head out, please. Thank you, Chairwoman Waters. Thank you. We love you. Yeah, you may be able to find her outside. All right, guys, we have to clear that hallway. We have to clear this alleyway or this pathway, please. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Ooh, there's so much love for Maxine Waters in this room. Right? So if everybody could please quiet down because we have another incredible speaker waiting to come into this energized room and continue the conversation. So we're very lucky to have here today, ma'am. So we're very fortunate and honored to have here today Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. She is serving her 4th term in Congress, representing the 7th District of Washington State, and she is the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And as such, she has emerged as a powerful, strategic, really powerful leader on Capitol Hill, where she has used that power to call for bold solutions to the housing crisis. And because of her leadership, NLIHC awarded the full Progressive Caucus last year with the Edward W. Brooke Housing Leadership Award. So please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Jayapal. So, let me put your name tag up.
Oh my gosh, you were fired up by Auntie Max. I mean, how good is that? There's nothing better.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. We have an energized crowd that's been spending 2 days talking about the crisis, talking about the needed solutions, building power, talking about the importance of impacted people being central to it all. So you have a really interesting background. I think that's relevant to all of that. And before you started serving in government, you were a civil rights activist, fighting for the rights of women, immigrants, and civil and human rights. So can you share with us a little bit about how your background in activism influences your leadership in Congress?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to see you, Diane. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, everybody, for the incredible work. Yes, you can give yourselves a round of applause that you all are doing. It just makes me so proud to have such a strong, vibrant coalition of partners with lived experience who are doing the work that we need to do to make sure we have housing justice. I never thought I wanted to be an elected official, to be quite honest. I was on the other side. I've been arrested for civil disobedience a number of times because, as the late, great John Lewis said, we need to make sure we are creating good trouble. Good trouble. And the truth is, we've had discrimination and racism in our country for a long time, and it's required that kind of organizing on the outside. And so I always thought that was the place that I could have the most impact. I started what is the largest immigrant and civil rights organization in Washington State. Shout out to all my Washington State people. Yes, oh, right here. Okay, excellent. And I also was on the committee that raised the minimum wage to $15 in Seattle. We became the first major city to do that. And I thought that was the place that organizing was most important. But after a decade and a half of doing that, I think I realized that I was always going to elected officials to tell them what we needed to do and trying to convince them that that was what we needed to do. And it suddenly occurred to me that we were ceding as organizers the biggest territory, which was inside elected office. And what would happen if an organizer went inside elected office and tried to organize on the inside? And so that was my theory of change, is that elected office is much more than just a place where we make the laws. It is also a place to build movements. It's a place to organize power within Congress. We have amazing greats, OGs, people like Maxine Waters, people like Barbara Lee, people who have been here but need reinforcements, need help, need more people to come in and help achieve these outcomes. And so in 2014, I decided to just give it a try in the state Senate. I became the only woman of color in the Washington State Senate at the time. Very happy to say that part of our job is to create leadership ladders. So now there are many more women of color in the Washington State Senate, many more black women, which we did not have at all when I was there, in the legislature, and we're continuing to try to build that leadership pipeline. But I realized when I came to Congress in 2016 that the Progressive Caucus was run also by amazing people, Raul Grijalva and Keith Ellison, but that this was the locus of justice in the Progressive Caucus. But we needed power also. We needed to be able to collectivize our power and be able to vote as a bloc and be able to have it mean something to have a Progressive Caucus. So Maxine was one of the original founders, Bernie Sanders, of course, and others. And they have said today, it's almost unthinkable, but we have 102 members of the Progressive Caucus. We are 50% of the Democratic caucus, and when it comes to issues like housing, what we saw last year is it was the Progressive Caucus that held the line to make sure we could get housing and that $150 billion investment into housing into Build Back Better. We were not going to pass the infrastructure bill without passing Build Back Better. And it took a lot of courage. It took a lot of collective power. It took a lot of organizing on the inside. But we have built that, and we will continue to build that, because I think that with you together, we are on the front lines of fighting for justice.
Thank you. So it's incredible, actually, I knew that story, but to hear you tell it and to realize that you've been in Congress for a relatively short period of time and are now the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, so you must be a pretty good politician as well as an activist.
I'm just a really good organizer.
Yes.
I really know what it means to organize.
Yes. And so under your chairing of the caucus is really, the Progressive Caucus has really prioritized solutions to unaffordable housing and to homelessness. So share with us a little bit about why for you and for the Progressive Caucus, housing is such a key issue.
Yeah. Well, for me, Washington State, actually Seattle, has the third highest level of houselessness in the country after New York and LA. So it has been very clear to me for a long time, and when I was doing immigrant and civil rights work, I was often called to the table for housing coalitions, and I would find that there were no folks of color there. There were no people with lived experience, or very few. And so it has been important to me from the very beginning, because how do you do anything without a place to live? It is incredibly difficult to take care of employment, to take care of whatever your needs are, to take care of a family if you don't have a home. And so I'm very proud of Seattle and Washington State for really prioritizing housing first. That is the way that we have to move forward. We have to think about all of the things that are related to poverty. By the way, poverty is a policy choice. It is a very bad policy choice. Absolutely. So is homelessness. So is houselessness. It is a bad poverty choice. We have disinvested in housing at the federal level for decades. And we have not put the money, the resources, the overall wraparound services that we need into this sector. And that has meant that cities across the country are dealing with this issue. It is not a moral failure, a personal failure. It is a result of a bad policy choice. So the good news about that is we can change that. And that's why it's important to me. For the CPC, what was really interesting is we have a very democratic process because, you know, we're Democrats and we're progressives. And so we have to go through that process. And that involves, when we come up with our priorities, we actually get everybody's input. Then we put it all back to people and we say, now vote. And when we were doing Build Back Better, I said, we cannot be the same progressive movement that has 8,000 priorities. We need 5. And so people had to vote. And guess what was number 1? Housing. It was housing. And it was really amazing to see, because when the president had meetings with the different ideological caucuses, had the Blue Dogs in and the New Dems and then the progressives, and they put their priorities on the table. When we came into the room, we put our priorities onto the table. We were the only ideological coalition that said housing is in our top priorities. And Cory Booker, Barbara Lee, me, we were all in that room, and we were also making the connection between racial justice and housing. We were making the connection between economic justice and housing. And so that's why it has been so central. It was on our executive action list. It will be on our executive action list again. So we did some amazing things through our appropriations budget. We held the line in the House. We couldn't get the Senate there. What we need to do is get rid of that racist Jim Crow legacy filibuster that stops us from passing bills. Because just think about this, 40 senators representing 11% of the population can stop the majority from getting something done. One person can stop investments in universal childcare, housing, universal pre-K. So we need to make sure we get 50 Democratic senators who are willing to abolish the filibuster, and we can move forward on so many of these priorities.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll have some questions, I'm sure, from the audience. And this time we're going to start towards the back, so if you have questions, you can think about them. But the Congressional Progressive Caucus has its People's Housing Platform.
Yeah.
And one key part of that is the Housing is a Human Rights Act, which is your bill, which I believe you reintroduced today.
I did. I just reintroduced it today. Yeah.
So tell us about it.
Well, it's a $300 billion investment into housing, into building more affordable housing, into housing vouchers, into a housing first approach. And it really tries to address systemic harms as well as immediate problems. And it is, in my view, the answer forward. And I really appreciate, Diane, your assistance and the coalition's assistance and all of you for helping us to push forward the idea that this is a problem we can solve, that this is an issue that we know with resources, with the right kind of resources, with sufficient resources, and with wraparound resources, we can begin to address this issue. So please take a look at the bill. Please do whatever you can to help me get it across the finish line. We also, by the way, at the CPC have, as Diane mentioned, a whole set of bills around housing. And so those will start to, different members of the caucus have different parts of this. If you put them all together, it is such a beautiful vision of how we can address the problems of houselessness and allow people to be their best selves and live their best lives.
Absolutely. So do we have, okay, great. Tori, let's go to the woman in the pink in the back, and then we'll come to Joy Johnson over here.
Hi, my name is Marsh Santoro. I'm your neighbor down in Oregon.
Excellent. We like Oregon too, Pacific Northwest.
Well, first off, I want to read you something. Oregon Senate just passed a major $2 million partisan housing and homeless package. Includes Governor Kotek's $155 million urgent funding to rehouse people, provides money for rural areas, unsheltered children, keep people from losing homes, rent assistance, and other measures. But my question for you, I champion housing first, and you are doing it in Seattle. My question is, if you are doing housing first, I've listening to the way the VA is doing it. Are you just housing them first? Are you asking them what their needs are first and then going from there? Because I'm finding that people don't always need a house first. They might need other things before they need that house.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned the VA because the VA Secretary, Secretary McDonough, was just out in Seattle, and we just had a roundtable with him at the VA. And it mirrors a lot of the other efforts that housing providers like DESC, King County Authority, and others are doing, which is we are working, obviously, in the housing community, we're working with the houselessness community. We are also working with those who are on the brink of losing their housing. And so housing is actually one of the top needs. But you're right that people think about their needs in very different ways. And if it's a family, for example, a lot of times what we hear is education. And so the Housing First model means that you are looking at all of the needs of that individual, of that family, and trying to address those. But I think it is a recognition that if you're living on the street, for most people, that is a major barrier to the other things that they want. So that's sort of how we think about it. We've had some amazing success in Seattle, in part because we have such incredible nonprofit partners, housing partners. We have incredible social services. There are new models. I was just with the fire department, and they have a mobile health unit that they are sending out, which is also addressing the health issues that people are having. Sometimes, drug overdose situations. And so I think we are finally breaking through into the idea that these things are siloed. They're not siloed. You know, they all go together, and we're finally starting to put together teams, whether it's at the VA, whether it's at the fire department, whether it's our housing providers, that are trying to really provide that full set of wraparound services that will answer to the exact needs that people have.
Thank you. So Joy is going to get the last question for now, and I'll have one wrap-up question. Get mad at me, don't get mad at her. Joy?
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Joy Johnson, and I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia. We are I'm the chair of FAR, Public Housing Association of Residents. It's run strictly by public housing residents. We are helping to redevelop our 376 public housing units that is in the city of Charlottesville, but we're also adding more affordable housing by doing tax credit. What we have ran into, we didn't do RAD, and we fought against it and won. What we were running into is that Faircloth has now stopped us from bringing back what we had in 1999, which was 376 public housing units.
Yeah.
We're trying to get those back and add, but because of Faircloth, it is now sitting on paper because we can't bring them back. I want to bring that to your attention, and I would like to know, how are you going to proceed to do something to repeal Faircloth so we can get one-for-one replacement back?
Totally. Yeah. Actually, that was my amendment in the last appropriations budget, to get rid of Faircloth, to repeal Faircloth, because I think you're exactly right. We have to go to the root of the problem here. We have to give you the tools, and we have to take away the barriers that the federal government has put in place. So thank you for doing that work. I think the discriminatory nature of Faircloth is very clear, and so we will continue to try to do what we can. And let me just tell you, we're not going to do it with Republicans in power. These people want to cut housing, they want to cut safety nets, they want to cut Social Security, Medicare. We need to push back. We need to make sure we have majorities again, and sufficient majorities in the Senate, because in the People's House, we do what's right for the people. In the Senate, we're blocked, and it's not really a good excuse to go back and tell people that the rules don't allow us to do something. If the rules don't allow us to do something, we need to change the rules and make sure that we're getting it done.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Great. Great.
Joy.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much.
So last question, I guess last thoughts from you. We are looking ahead to a really tough budget season. Republicans putting out proposals to gut HUD funding, to eliminate Section 8 vouchers. What advice and thoughts would you leave us with as we gear up for tomorrow's Capitol Hill Day, where over 300 people are going to the Hill?
Well, first of all, that is so fabulous. I'm so happy to see you all at the Hill instead of all the lobbyists that are usually outside our doors. Of course, I don't take any corporate PAC money, so, you know, they don't come to see me. But but here's what I would say. We have this incredible ace in the hole with housing. Housing affordability is an issue that every district almost every district is facing. This is a top issue for Republicans, independents, and Democrats. If you ask them what their top issues are, housing is one of the biggest inflationary costs. Everyone's talking about inflation, but you know what? It's not just the price of food. The two biggest inflationary costs are housing and childcare. So we have this moment to talk to Republicans as well as Democrats about the fact that housing is a bad policy, you know, homelessness is a bad policy choice, and that we can fix it. And they have constituents in their districts. So how many people are in districts that have Republican representatives in this room? So, you know, there are some in here, but what I would say is let's build I'm thinking as an organizer, let's pick our targets and let's build out the coalition to include folks in those areas of legislators that need to hear from their constituents that this is an issue. That's how we start to get them on board, because we have lived experience talking to legislators in their districts saying, this is an issue for us. And it will test us a little bit, because we in the organizing movement often work with the people we know. We often go to the legislators that are going to be on the same page as us. I know, I do this too. And we have to break out of that. If we want to win on these issues, we need to be strategic about where we're building, organizing, and coalitions. And I promise you, if this group of incredible advocates sat down and said, okay, we need this place, and this place, who can we send to help build something in one of those places, right? And I know it's a lot to ask because you're all so strapped, but I think that that's what we need to do to really have housing take its place on the list of priorities for folks across the aisle. But it's not just across the aisle. You know, I mentioned that the Progressive Caucus was the only coalition that put on the table that housing was a priority for us. And so we do need to do that work even with everybody else to make sure people understand how critical getting housing is and what it would take and all the different pieces of the housing spectrum that need to be addressed in order to really allow people to live with dignity and fully be who they are.
Thank you for your leadership. We're behind you all the way. Please join me in thanking Representative Jayapal.
Thank you all. Appreciate you.
So we have two final videos from two messages from members of Congress, and then we'll move on to our final workshops. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the National Low Income Housing Coalition for hosting this conference and for all the work that you do to support nationwide housing justice efforts. As a formerly unhoused person, my advocacy work for unhoused communities is deeply personal and political. I know what it's like to be evicted. I know what it's like to live out of a car with my two babies. I know what it's like to be failed by policymakers. And that is what the unhoused crisis is. Moral and policy failures that leave people and their children without homes, that evicts our elders and other vulnerable communities, and that upend lives. Like these failures, the legislative solutions too are clear. I introduced the Unhoused Bill of Rights to end this man-made crisis by 2025. I'm also proud to announce the relaunch of the Congressional Caucus on Homelessness to provide an open forum for members of Congress to work toward the common goal of permanently ending homelessness. As policymakers, we carry a mandate to save lives, and we can do that by providing both temporary and permanent housing solutions to every single person in need. People re-entering our communities from the criminal legal system need targeted programs and services designed to keep them in homes and out of jails and prisons. Unhoused youth need flexible tutors, need transportation services, and even just a place to wash their clothes so that they can attend school. That's a real thing. The solutions to the unhoused crisis will be varied according to each community's needs, but one thing remains constant. A housing-first approach works. During the pandemic, emergency provisions like the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, stimulus checks, and child tax credits kept people housed. And guess what? Our economy didn't collapse. Rather, it helped save communities from completely collapsing. That's why we took action on the Capitol steps in 2021 and stayed out there for 4 nights and 5 days to demand the federal eviction moratorium be reinstated. We knew it would save countless lives in St. Louis and beyond. It's critical that these life-saving programs are not only deployed in times of emergency, but they become permanent fixtures in our social safety net. I have no doubt in my mind that together, we can end the unhoused crisis. We can. Just think, if Congress can spend nearly $1 trillion on an absurdly inflated defense budget, we can certainly invest in people's well-being and wraparound services that provide medical care, nutrition programs, and mental health services to help people recover from the trauma of being unhoused. Well, thank you again to all at the National Low Income Housing Coalition for your unwavering leadership. Thank you for your invaluable partnership and your steadfast commitment to housing justice for all. We appreciate being your partner.
Hi, I'm Mike Quigley, representative of Illinois' 5th District and ranking member of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Subcommittee. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words about the critical need for affordable housing across our country and the important role NLIHC plays in this effort. Housing is a fundamental human right, but far too many don't have access to it. In December of 2022, HUD reported that more than 582,000 people were experiencing homelessness across the country. In my own state of Illinois, it's estimated that over 10,000 people are living in shelters, parks, abandoned buildings, and in cars. There are many contributing factors to this problem, but in the simplest form, there's a lack of available housing for all those who need it. During my time in Congress, I prioritized supporting resources for more affordable housing. In the FY 2022 appropriations bill, I secured $1 million in community project funding for the Center on Halstead's youth housing program to enhance their facilities and better serve Chicago's LGBTQ+ and ally youth experiencing homelessness. I'm proud to share that at the end of last year, Congress passed our fiscal 2023 THUD bill, which provided $58.2 billion in funding for HUD. It includes $3.6 billion for homeless assistance grants to increase housing accessibility for people at risk or experiencing homelessness. $1.5 billion for the Home Investment Partnership Program to help expand affordable and workforce housing by acquiring, rehabilitating, or constructing new housing, or to support eligible families with rental assistance. 12,000 new housing choice vouchers for low-income families, domestic violence survivors, and those at risk of homelessness. And over 2,800 new units for seniors and persons with disabilities, including $25 million for new intergenerational housing, and in addition to more than 29,000 new housing units created in fiscal year 2022. It provides up to $2.5 million for technical assistance for recipients of grants under the PRICE program to strengthen urban and rural communities, tribal communities, and areas prone to natural disasters. It will also increase enforcement in fair housing by providing $86.4 million for fair housing and equal opportunity. These are just a few of the important provisions included in this package. While this funding will continue to help address the affordable housing crisis, there's still much more work to be done. As ranking member, I'm looking forward to this new opportunity to fight for what matters. That means improving safety, protecting vulnerable populations, and eliminating inequities and disparities in our housing systems. That also means pushing back against suggested cuts to housing programs that some of my colleagues on the Hill are pushing for. We must protect these critical programs and the vital role they have in curbing homelessness and providing affordable housing options. But we can't solve this crisis alone. Together, with the help of tireless advocates like yourselves, we will continue to make solving the housing crisis a top priority. We will provide people options that are both affordable and safe. We will change lives step by step. Thank you for your time and for your dedication.